Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency to order Thursday, January 9th, 2020 at 1:35. Please conduct the roll call.
Director Crane? Director Brown?
Here.
Director Robinson?
Present.
Director Cardoza?
Here.
Director White?
Here.
Chair Brown?
Here. All right, let's all stand and pledge allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. On our consent item, that's number 3 on our agenda, is approval of the minutes from the November 14th, 2019 meeting. Directors?
Second it.
So we have a motion for approval by Vice Chair Crane. And who was the second? Director White. We'll have a roll call vote, please.
Yes.
Director Crane?
Aye.
Director Brown? Director Robinson?
Aye.
Director Cardoza?
Abstain. I wasn't at the meeting.
Chair Brown?
Aye. Okay. Now we'll go on to staff updates. Ms. Duquette.
No update at this time.
Pardon?
We don't have an update today for this section.
Okay, thank you. This is a time for public comment on items not on the agenda. Anyone that would like to get up and speak, please come forward. State your name for the record. Seeing no one come forward, we're back to item number 6, action items on our agenda. And we'll begin with item A, update discussion, possible action regarding the development of a Ukiah Valley Basin integrated hydrological conceptual model. So the board will receive an update on the development, and we'll go forward from there, and I don't know who's going to further introduce it or take us through it.
Sierra Duquette, Mendocino County Water Agency. In your packets, you have a full presentation, and that will include the presentation materials for the action items A, B, C, and D. We have our team from Larry Walker and Associates here, Laura, Amir, and Steven. At this time, I'll turn it over to Laura for 6A.
Okay, and basically this is the outline that gives you an idea of what we will be talking about. I think probably we might,
Please start again.
okay. So the items might not be exactly in the order of A, B, and C that you have, but we will go through everything in the presentation. Can you hear me properly?
Yes,
Okay.
and just tell us as we go through which one you're on.
Yeah. So we will start with an update on the hydrological model development, which is the A, and then we will move into the GSP chapter that you received a copy about in your agenda package, and then we will discuss review and commenting process that we are implementing for the chapters, and then the last one we will discuss the. I think this one is, if time allows, let's see how we are doing. We kind of overdue in the agenda, thinking that we would like to give you all the information. We have a short preliminary discussion, an introduction on sustainable criteria, which is gonna be the key piece of the discussion for the next meetings. So, if you, just to remind you what we did up to now, we presented to you last time the final version of the hydrogeological conceptual model, which we call here HCM. And we asked the TAC to provide comment. We didn't get, and we presented it both here and at the TAC meetings. We didn't get any significant comments, so we are for now moving forward with the idea that you will receive this chapter again as a final chapter, and so you will have another opportunity to review, so it's not that it's over. And so we are just now formalizing what was the technical memo and putting in the format of a GSP chapter. We also presented to you some preliminary results of all the models that we are developing. We are moving forward with that, and we basically will just tell you where we are right now. We now have all the water budget pretty much done. We discussed it this morning with the TAC. There are many things, I don't want to be too optimistic, many things that we still need to tweak, but at least they are all in place, so we have a tool that we can use for our analysis. And then probably we will be talking about technical support services and how we are moving forward with the installation of new wells and new instruments. For the water budget, I don't know, Amir, you want to just finalize what we did for the models?
Amir Mani, LWA. I'm going to just start with the conceptual model, and then Stephen would go through the PRMS and mud flow. Basically, what we talked last time was we're going to have, in the end, like our end goal is a model that collects all the information from the 3 buckets that you see below, which we call it the integrated hydrological model. It's the GS flow model from USGS. But now we are having the separate parts. We're working on the separate parts of that model and kind of trying to optimize and calibrate each part separately, and then we're going to work them all together and combine them. So what you'll see in the next slides is just a preliminary water budget for each part of this model, which starts from PRMS, which is our watershed surface model, which kind of simulates the runoff process in the whole Russian River watershed up to Hopland. Then we have a root zone budget, which is used to generate the agricultural pumpage and irrigation needs. And then the mud flow, which is basically our groundwater part of the model, and it would link to the PRMS and simulate the interaction that we want to see. So I hand it off to Stephen to start from here.
Stephen Maples, Larry Walker Associates. So can you pass me that? So if you take a look at this slide here, it shows how each of the 3 pieces that Amir just mentioned, the PRMS model, which simulates the watershed, this is the first one. So basically we take existing data from weather stations and from estimates of land cover throughout the entire watershed, not just the GSA area. And we use those data to look at what the natural stream flows that are coming into feeding the Russian River Basin are contributing. And for right now, we're doing this for the historical water budget period, which is from 1991 through 2018. So that's the first piece. That generates all the runoff that contributes to the GSA area. So we also have mod flow. So this is the main groundwater flow model, which we use to allocate water to agricultural needs and to municipal needs. And this is mostly within the GSA area itself. So each of these components are being developed independently, and ultimately we'll be combining these together. The last component that I'd like to mention is the agricultural model. So for right now, we're using a tool developed by Department of Water Resources called IDC, Irrigation Demand Calculator. So this is where we use estimates of crop type and other agricultural inputs to estimate water demand and groundwater pumping. So eventually, like Amir and Laura mentioned, these 3 pieces will be integrated dynamically within a code called GS Flow that is developed by the US Geological Survey. But for now, we're developing each of these components independently and separately. That's sort of the established method for developing these tools, and it allows us to ensure that each piece is working correctly before we put them all together. So I'm going to present some preliminary results from PRMS, and just to remind you, this is for the entire watershed model. So what this is simulating is sort of the natural flows within the entire watershed. And if you look at the graph here on the plot, you'll see basically two lines. This is for a period between 2014
Sir,
and
I don't think we have that one in our packet, so I just,
We distributed a draft version and we had some final changes, but we'll upload the final one today for
Okay. All right.
you guys to take home.
Yeah, I apologize that we don't have the most up-to-date one for you in your packet. But if you take a look at this, you can see that blue is the observed flow that is measured at the Russian River at the Hopland gauge, and the red line here is what we're simulating with our current watershed model. And as you can see, this is on what we call log scale, so you're seeing all the high flows at the very top and the low flows at the bottom, and what you can see here is during the low flow periods during the summertime when we're most worried about flows in the Russian River, this is the hardest period to sort of simulate with these models, and we're doing pretty well with the agreement between the simulated flows and the measured flows. And this is, there are still some improvements that we would like to make. For one, there's this low period here where we're simulating much lower flows for a brief period during the spring of 2017, and we believe that's an issue with our input data. So like Laura mentioned, this is sort of an iterative process, and we keep improving upon the models every time we add more data and do more calibration, and the end goal is before we couple these models together, each of them is working pretty well independently. So we're just showing this here to say that the PRMS watershed model is behaving pretty well, and we're pretty happy with the results that we're getting so far. So I'm going to move forward. This is the irrigation demand calculator, so this is the agricultural model, and I'm going to pass this off to Amir to talk about it.
Amir Mani, LWA. So we talked about IDC last meeting, but pretty much went through the demands that we calculated for grapes and for pears and for pasture, the three crops, main crops in the basin area. So what it shows here is practically all those crops that we have in the basin altogether averaged out as a water budget for the root zone. So this is practically showing the annual numbers for the green is the irrigation that is done within the basin area. The blue is the infiltration due to the precipitation that happens every year, and the red is the water that is percolated through the groundwater and will be simulated through mud flow later on. And the yellow is the ET that is needed for agricultural needs and other riparian vegetation. So our intent of having this here is that, first of all, we checked it with our preliminary mud flow results, and they are in the same order of magnitude. And we're going to harmonize them when we couple them. But just to show you that practically things to get out of this figure is the irrigation demand. It does change year to year, but the change is not significant. So it's in the same order practically annually, the amount of water that we apply in this basin. What really changes to an amount that you can see on the figure is practically frost protection that is in black, because some years you do have frost protection, some years you don't. And the other parts are just climate associated parameters that will be simulated through PRMS when we couple these models. Just a quick note that the colors on the top are just the 3 types of weather, and this is for when we go further in the GSP process, but we have to have water budgets for 3 types of weather based on the regulation. One is dry, one is average, and one is wet. That we did this here based on the historical precipitation, but I know that the hydrological index is defined by the SONOMA based on the inflow to the reservoir, so there are a couple ways to do it. But what we simulated here is just based on historical precipitation.
I just had a question about the crops that you were looking at for calculating this. What did you say they were?
So the whole analysis is based on the 2010 land use map published by the DWR. So basically all the crops that fall within that basin area we're considering, we were lumping some of the land use together. So we're not as, we don't have, we have row crops. We don't have specific types of row crops, but basically the ones that we worry about, and it's a majority of the acreage in the basin, are grapes, pasture, and pears.
So with the enormous amount of water that people are using for cannabis growth, don't you think that should be part of the calculation, especially since it's an approved?
Exactly. So, we are going to consider that, and we do have some maps for it. Cannabis is not shown here because the 2010 land use map that we use does not have cannabis in it, and it was not legal back then. So that just to add to the discussion is that we have to simulate the change in the land use during this whole 30-year period that we're showing, because grapes were different in 2006, the acreage pairs were different. That's one thing that we're going to add to our model using the ET parameter. And when we do that, we can roll in the cannabis based on the data that we get. One other small hurdle that we now have is that we don't really know the crop coefficient for cannabis because it's different based on the practice. We had a long discussion this morning in the TAC. So these are some parameters that we need to get to simulate cannabis as good as we can. So we're gonna add that, yes, 100% to our calculations in the future. That's not something we're gonna neglect, but we do need some more work on it.
I just want to add to Sarah Duquette, Mendocino County. We've been working with Larry Walker and Associates and the Department of Planning and Building, where the Cannabis Licensing Division is out to try to assist in identifying the amount of acreage in production within the Russian River portion and try to work to get them the data they need to calibrate when they get to that point. So just wanted you guys to know that the county's working with Larry Walker so that that new legal crop can be considered as we go forward.
Okay, Stephen Maples, Larry Walker Associates. So we presented on the two of the three components here, the watershed model and the agricultural model. And right now I'm going to show some preliminary results for ModFlow, which simulates the entire groundwater budget. And so what we can do as a GSA, we're focused on the groundwater system, obviously, but we can use the estimates from the previous two models to inform the groundwater model. And how we do that is we take the infiltration numbers from PRMS and from IDC. So this is the amount of water that's percolating from the land surface into the groundwater system, and we can apply that as what we call a boundary condition in the ModFlow model. And so what I'm presenting on here is an initial preliminary result for the ModFlow model. I would consider that the other two models are a little bit further along in their development, and much of our effort has been focused on developing the ModFlow model. And there's still a couple steps that we are working through right now. One of those is called calibration, where we adjust some of the parameters to better match our observations. That effort is ongoing right now, but we can, what we're presenting here is sort of a general water budget to show you what the big terms are in the groundwater basin. So the plot here is, again, 30 years from 1991 to 2018, and these are annual water budget values. The area above zero here, the positive values, are the amount of water that's entering the groundwater system. So the major components that are entering the system are from recharge. So that's infiltration from the landscape. And we also have boundary flows. So that's in the GSA area, those are groundwater that is flowing from elsewhere in the watershed into the groundwater system. And the amount that is leaving is due to discharge from the groundwater system to the stream network, and that includes both the Russian River and the tributaries, and then groundwater pumping. So this gives us a general idea of what those numbers are, the general order of magnitude. These numbers will change as we go through the calibration process, like I mentioned. But as you can see, during dry years, there's less water entering the system and less water that's discharging to surface water. And in wet years, we see that there's more water that's entering the system and conversely leaving the system. So this is to demonstrate that the model is behaving generally how we anticipate it will be, but as we advance forward, and especially when we couple these three components together, we'll see some improvements and maybe some changes in the groundwater budget.
Your TAN recharge back there, that includes rainfall infiltration? Your biggest component there for recharge.
Oh, yes, exactly.
Okay, and then your is that purple? I don't know what color to call that, but your boundary flows, that is groundwater entering the basin boundaries?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so that's subsurface flows coming in.
Right.
And then what about stream flow on top, or is that not part of this modeling effort until we couple the models?
It is part of this effort, and what we're showing here is an annual value. So on a year, an entire year, the cumulative effect is that water is discharging to the streams cumulatively. But during different parts of the year, the majority of the water will be entering or leaving the groundwater system. But if you take that number and you accumulate it over the entire year, the net result is that groundwater is leaving the system through stream discharge.
Understood.
Amir Mani, LWA, just to add something to be technically correct, so that amount that enters the basin is not technically groundwater because it's outside the basin and we don't have an aquifer outside the basin. It's basically a stream, tributaries, water that is dragged into the basin and it's like in the alluvial, in the stream bed of the tributaries. And then it enters the basin and then it's considered groundwater because it's within the boundaries of the basin. So it's the first layer of the aquifer, which includes the stream beds of the tributaries outside the basin. But based on DWR maps, there are no basins defined. We don't have an aquifer outside the basin, so it's just water coming into the basin and then going into the aquifer.
That would be Gibson Creek, Hoolan Creek.
It includes all the other tributaries,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, Laura Faglia, LWA. So we can, this was kind of the introduction on the technical work that we are keeping doing just to keep you posted that things are moving. We were planning to have the full integrated model in our original timeline at some point in March this year, and I think now that we have all the three components, we will bring all the pieces together, and then we will be able, Zach, to answer better also all this question about exactly how things are entering, because right now we are double checking that all the components work out between the three pieces, but when they will be all together, obviously they will be it will be clear, and we will really be able to see how things are interacting in the system. And the other topic that you want to discuss today, so you received in your package a very preliminary draft, I really wanted to point out, and of chapter 2.1. And so the idea is that we would like to use this chapter 2.1 sort of for testing our reviewer comment process, because it will be a lot of work. Oh, Sarah.
Just to clarify, that concludes presentation on 6A.
Oh.
We're moving to item 6B.
Sorry.
Okay, and so let's stop for one moment.
Mm-hmm.
I thought we were, but I wasn't.
Sorry, I just kept going.
So it says update, discussion, and possible action. I don't see anyone of the directors having any action on this, so we just move forward to item B. Thank you. Please go forward.
Okay, and then, perfect, sorry. And so we distributed chapter 2.1, which is mostly, it includes mostly already existing information about the system and the basin. And even if you remember at the very beginning, we were saying that we were going to give the chapters to the TAC. The TAC was providing comments, and then the process was coming to the board. For this specific chapter, we decided that it was good to get comments and feedback from everybody, because it's not technical information. It's more like us doing a due diligence on gathering information about the system. So everybody can contribute to this information in a different parts of it, and both the member of the TAC and the member of the board. And plus, it's really going to be helpful for us to explain to you what we plan to do for the future commenting process. So we are basically using this chapter 2.1, which is the easy one. The complicated one will come later, as our test, and just to get everybody up to speed. I think it is important to point out that if we get a lot of comments sooner in the process and not just when we release the latest version, it's gonna be very beneficial for being more successful. Because it's true, people a lot of time, they just prefer to wait the last second, but that might be more complicated.
And I would just like to comment, we rely heavily on our technical advisory committee, and I know you had, I don't know how long your meeting was today, but your previous one, I believe, was like 3 hours. So, you know, that is very important, I feel, to all of us as we're moving forward
Yeah.
to get a final product.
Carrie,
Yes, sir.
I think one thing that we should be aware of, you didn't mention it, but I'm sure you can clarify. I was at the TAC meeting today, and along the lines of the work that's being done, you formed a ad hoc type committee for the, could you inform everybody of what that was? And
Because it's not in the, it's an extra topic, yeah. So basically what we decided to do is, we know that based on what we are doing and based on all the discussion that we are having with different member of the community here, the main issue that the main undesirable results, and we will get to that definition and everything later on today, but is the interaction between surface water and groundwater. This is kind of the reason why we are here, probably, because that's the problem in this basin. So we realized that, yeah, we are moving at a good pace, but the amount of work to be done is huge in front of us, and we need to be done with most of the technical work, the management action and everything in a year from now, honestly. Something like maybe March, so 13 months. And we decided to create an ad hoc working group for surface water, groundwater interaction. And this working group includes 4 members of the TAG, so it will be a working group with, it has less than the majority of the TAG member, and there will be opportunity to discuss with public and other members that may provide information. The goal of the working group is really to gather all the possible information and data, whatever, about surface water, groundwater in advance to the TAC meeting. So this is gonna save us time because it's such a complicated topic. We cannot pretend to do everything in 3 hours or 2 hours and a half at the TAC meeting. So this will help us having extra meeting, providing the technical information. Then this technical information will go to the TAC, and then, as you know, will arrive here at the second step.
So the ad hoc, who are the members?
Mike Webster from the RCD, Laurel Marcus from the Land Institute, Sean White from the city of Ukiah, and Marcus Troda from Sonoma Water.
Okay, great, thank you.
you also decided to meet on Wednesdays in the afternoon so that it wasn't all jammed up against this meeting on Thursday.
Moving forward, we're going to try to maximize as much time as we can. So Larry Walker and associates that are out there will probably be out here for 2 days, so we can kind of spread it out a little bit, because we'll be doing TAC meetings, these board meetings, stakeholder meetings, tribal meetings. So we changed the time so that we can have more participation with the TAC, but also spread it out so that we can make sure we can get all of the meetings we need to in a 2 to 3 day period.
Thank you. Go forward, please.
Yeah. So to give you an idea of what we sent you, and we were not really going to ask you to provide reviews right now. It's really, we want to explain to you today the process so that then next time we can really move forward. So I will provide you an overview of what's chapter 2 and also the focus of the chapter and ideas on, I don't know if you just scroll through the chapter, you would found probably a lot of places where it was written information needed. And so what we did, more than digging for information that we believe people in the basin already have, we pointed out what we need, and the hope is that people will move forward and tell us, I have exactly what you need. So don't waste your energy and time for gathering information that are already available. We can give it to you. And it's really a way to, we hope to optimize our efforts, your time, and really take advantage of the knowledge that already exists. And our idea for moving forward is that every time we give you a chapter or a part of a chapter, we put together a cover letter that explains what's in the chapter, which are the key information that you really have to review, and also which are the key gaps. So what really we may need, because we understand that this chapter was short. Other chapters may be 100 pages, and maybe you don't want to go through everything, but if we summarize in advance which are the key information, you may have more interest in just looking into specific topics. This is just to remind you the entire GSP. So we kind of skipped chapter 1, which is the introduction, because it's mostly probably Sarah's work. It's gonna be all the technical, the detailed administrative information about the GSA. So we are really concentrating right now on the chapter 2, which is the plan area and the basin settings. So, and this chapter has two main sub-chapters. One is the 2.1 that you received already, and it's mostly existing information, administrative information about districts, practices, existing monitoring. And then there is a chapter 2.2, which talks more about the groundwater conditions, so the system as it is right now. And we are working on that part with our water budget analysis, all what we have done up to now in terms of technical work, the hydrological conceptual model. They will enter into that chapter 2.2 that you will receive in a second round. We just figured that it was good to break it so that we really have a process in place. And so the main parts that are included in chapter 1 are a summary of jurisdictional areas, information about water resources monitoring and management programs, and here we are talking really about existing programs. So we are not talking about what the GSA and the GSP will implement. Land use elements or topic categories for applicable general plans, and then I will show you which type of additional groundwater sustainability plan elements we may have to take into account. This is a summary to give you an idea. So for example, on the description of the plan area, when we have to present the summary of jurisdictional areas, we basically need general information about the Russian River watershed, and we already gathered some of it, but again, and then the PVP project. And then we go into the second chapter, which is more about monitoring and management programs. And here probably is where we had most of the gaps, or we know that there are programs existing, but we need help from the TAC and the board to really fill in all the existing information, so that we know that we do our due diligence on listing everything which is already available and ongoing. And an example of monitoring and management program, we actually had a discussion this morning at the TAC. We kind of thought that there is some total maximum daily load implemented with the regional board, but it looks like it's not the case. So we will just have to say that there is, we don't really have to address that. And then we discuss about the need to gather information on county zoning plan and eventually the general plan and the UVAP. But I think probably the county will be helping us with all this information. Still, we wanted to point it out because a lot of what is available online, we probably try to gather it, but at the same time might be so time consuming. So that's the idea of bringing it out to you in advance. And then we were talking about which are additional GSP elements that we will be including in this chapter. And we will have to discuss about migration of contaminated groundwater and mostly about the cleanup site that looks like most of them are kind of closed right now, but there is still something going on, so we will have to take into account and mention that because we will have to use those data. And then the other part that probably will be trickier is discussing groundwater-dependent ecosystems and possible impacts of water management on dependent ecosystem. And these follow exactly in what we just said about the working group on surface water groundwater. Because surface water groundwater will look at, okay, the impact on the river, but obviously the impact on the groundwater dependent ecosystem. So we will have to look into different direction. And to give you an example, there are existing tools developed by the state about mapping, for example, groundwater dependent ecosystems, but it looks like we may have to come up with something on our own, because there is the Natural Conservancy map that is mapping groundwater dependent ecosystem in the valley, but from the comments that we got this morning at the TAC meeting, that may not be accurate, and I got other comments from other areas which are outside Central Valley, so the map seems to be very accurate when you are in Central Valley. As soon as you move out of Central Valley, it's not as accurate. So we may want to double check it. So this is what the working group will help us in terms of defining, because we will have to defining where are and which are these groundwater dependent ecosystems that needs to be protected. And
Could you give us an example of what a groundwater dependent ecosystem would be?
yeah, so groundwater dependent ecosystem are obviously rivers and riverine areas where you think that, you know, in those areas survive because the groundwater is kind of providing most of the contribution in terms of stream flow during most of the year. And, you know, it's basically groundwater is providing base flow. When the groundwater and when the surface water and the groundwater disconnect, that base flow is not guaranteed anymore, right? And so the amount of base flow change, and the impact is then not only that the amount of flow in the river is changing, but also the temperature of the river is changing, because the base flow is providing the cool temperature, in a sense, in the stream flow. And then wetlands are considered groundwater dependent ecosystems, so whatever it's a wetland. Actually also springs, because also the springs is fed by groundwater. So this is,
It's a pretty broad definition.
yeah, it's a very broad definition.
And so anything having to do with surface water temperatures, that interacts with outflows from the dam as well.
Yes. In your case, it's gonna be even more complicated.
Thank you.
You know, in a natural river, it's kind of easier to see if it's natural flow and how much base flow you have, looking at temperature. Obviously, with the release from the reservoir, it's going to be different.
Would you say that the main stem of the river is not so much a groundwater dependent ecosystem, but a managed flow dependent ecosystem?
I don't know if I would say so. That's what we are trying to, that's what we will have to discuss all together. And that's exactly why we are building these models, and we want to get this model up to a certain a level of trust that will help us making decision. So what we have seen is that things over time, so you know, your groundwater levels over time, we showed you at the very beginning, they're pretty stable. And what has changed is that anyway, for sure the reservoir has made an impact in the valley, because now the river is very incised, and obviously with the river levels going down, groundwater goes down just naturally, because they need to be. And so we will really need to use the model. I kind of think, from what we have seen up to now, that probably in the main stem of the river, I think the river and the aquifer are for most part connected. So the aquifer is still feeding the river maybe not all year around, but for a good part of the year. I think what we will have to spend some time with is the tributaries, because the tributaries kind of they get disconnected over a good chunk of the summertime, and it's kind of natural, but we will need to look into and there is no way to bring things back. I think probably it's a question of years of management, and the flow from the dam really scouring the riverbed and just bringing the river down. I remember exactly when we went around and we were looking. It's kind of, wow, it's really down there. So we will have to discuss really how it's part of an open discussion, how and what we want to really define as a groundwater dependent ecosystem. What we will need to provide goals for the basin based on reality. I mean, what it's there and what can really be done. So, but there is a lot of, because the definition is so broad, obviously there is a lot to work with. And now this brings us, this is just strictly connected to the review and commenting process. So you got this chapter. I just glimpsed on it. I didn't want to bother you too much with the technical details. And now we spent quite a bit of time thinking about how do we do now in terms of receiving the comments and keeping track of the comments and be sure that we are satisfying everybody in terms of answers. And also remember that the comments that we get needs to be included in the GSP. So we need to demonstrate that we got comments and we responded to the comments. So you imagine that there is no way for us to really allow everybody, for example, to get a Word file and provide track changes, because it would be kind of our never end. Then we don't do any technical work anymore, we just do the track changes. From other GSAs that are already down this path, we got some ideas of processes that are working. And so that's the reason why we will distribute together with an official draft version of chapter 2.1, this reviewer form. So the chapter that you received is a PDF with line numbers. What we really care about are substantial comments. We are trying to avoid as much as possible wording or stuff like that. Let's really be honest, we need to concentrate on the meat of the problem. So there is no time right now. We may do it at the very end. When we are done with the content, we can do wording and whatever, but right now we really need real information. So the way it will work is that you will get this form. We need your name, and then tell us which section you are reviewing, and then how it works. There is a column where you can put the line number of the document, and then another column where you can say, okay, for this line, I want to change this sentence into this because I don't agree. Or you can also put a question, say, why did you come up with this, or how did you find the data? So whatever. It has just to be something really on the content and not just telling us, oh, can you change this verb to that other one? Because I don't think it's a good use of your time and our time right now. We really want to get the real things done, and then we can do the words meeting. What we will do once we get all your comments, we will be able to order all the comments by line number. So we will go through the document only once, and we will take care of all the comments. And then we will add 2 more columns to this reviewer form. So there will be one column where we will say how we took care of your comment, and then another column with the new line number, because obviously the line number will change. So you will be able to double check what we did with your comment.
I just have to ask.
Uh-huh.
Scott Valley Basin,
Yeah?
is that Siskiyou County?
Yeah.
Okay, because there's a Scotts Valley
Yeah, no, that's
in
why.
Lake County
This is,
that,
this is I set it up and I started this kind of started this process up there. And
Familiar with all their issues up there. Yeah. Thank you.
yeah. But actually Sonoma, actually I have to say, the form, I think it comes originally from Sonoma. The facilitator group in Sonoma put together this idea. We reworked on it, but the first idea of having line number and comments has been developed in Sonoma, and it's used right now. And Marcus Trota today said that it's working pretty well for them. And then I started it last month in Siskiyou County, and now it's coming to you. I think that we are making it better every time. So that's my impression. So the first reaction up in Siskiyou County was not so positive, but here I have to say the TAC gave me way more satisfaction because they seem to understand why we are doing it in this way. We really want to avoid having 20 different versions of the same documents in Word, and then I need to have these guys out of their modeling Word and just take care of comments. And we don't want that. We really want to do the real work.
I would also add, we wanted to make sure there's the transparency element so that we know where the changes are and the public can see when those comments are addressed and where in the document things have changed, especially as we move along with multiple versions.
Yeah.
Breadcrumb trail.
Yeah, and all these comments really will be kind of an appendix into the GSP. So at the end of the day, everybody will be able to see who commented, which comment has been provided, and how they've been answered. And I think doing it with this chapter, which is kind of simple, it's probably really going to test if it works for everybody. If somebody really has hard time with it, with the process, we can think about other options, but hopefully it's gonna work out. And then we will come back with a new table with the answers and see if it really works for everybody.
Alrighty.
If that works for the board, what our next steps are when we're talking to the TAC is the actual formal email with the Word version of the commenting form, the draft document, and all of that kind of stuff. So that will be forthcoming soon after this meeting to do the first round of the formal commenting for Chapter 2.1. And I think that concludes 6B.
So we're on to C.
I think we're on to D.
It's this one. It's,
Yeah, D.
Oh, we're
D.
D?
yeah.
Okay, yes, we are. I put my glasses on.
Okay, so what we were planning to do today is to start a real complicated discussion of this GSP process and introduce some language and give you an idea of the decisions that we will be you will be making in the next year, pretty much. And the reason why we are bringing it today is because we kind of, I know, a few months ago we came to you and we had a plan on how to proceed. We kind of decided that we are making a little revolution, so we will be addressing things in a different way. And there is really, it's a learning process for everybody, this GSP process. So I think this new way of presenting it will be way more, hopefully more successful and easier to understand for everybody. So our idea is that we have the foundation right now, which is the model that we developed, the tool that we developed. They are not perfect. We will keep working on those and make refinement. And we will come back to you telling you, yeah, we changed this. Look, these are the new results. Do you like it? This is how we changed the crop map. Do you agree with that? So this will still come, but our main discussion at the TAC and with this board will not be anymore about the technical details that are coming together right now. It took a year, but it's almost there. We really want to go more into what will be presented in chapter 3 and 4, which are, we need to define, the GSA has to define the sustainable criteria and also the management action. So one of the things that it's important to remind is that the tools that we develop now, they should represent the system as it is right now, but we want to use these models for future management actions and just think about what we can do in the basin to reach the goal that the GSA will set for the next 20 years. And again, these goals, there is a review every 5 years, so if something really it's not on the right direction, can be corrected, but it's good to have to keep in mind that it's a 20 years process. So what we want to start in March, sorry.
Can I just stop 1
Sure.
minute? If any of you have something, just please, comment right away. And then that way we don't miss, because each one calls for action, possible action. So I'd like to keep a list of that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome. So what we will be starting in March, and this is something that probably we will be doing both at TAC and here, is a kind of a brainstorming discussion about, we need to start chapter 3 about the sustainable criteria with the definition of what's the sustainability goal of this basin. So where do you want to see your basin in 20 years from now? And how do we get there? And the idea is that we have some ideas of how to get some good discussion about that. And we are also working on existing GSPs that already have done that to provide you with some ideas, examples, and just to make everybody start thinking about, okay, what's this sustainability goal? And remember, the sustainability goal, it's not a number. It's not that you have to say, okay, in 20 years I want to see groundwater levels in that location at this level. No, that's not what is required. It's more like a general, very, a little fluffy in a sense. It's more a general statement. I really would like to see that the valley, I don't know, these tributaries are contributing in this way, that water is used in this other way. And we can come with example, because I have to say that it's difficult to really have a vision of what the sustainability goal can be right now. It can also be like, we want to keep going as it is right now. As it is right now, we like it and we think it's sustainable, and there is nothing we really want to change, or the other way around, we want to change it completely, or we will have to think about it. And that's the very kind of more abstract part, and then we will go into the sustainable criteria. We have to think about the process, like what we have done up to now. It's kind of the foundation of this house, and I'm not sure it really looks like a house, but it should look like a house. There is the hydrology, so it's all the technical work that we have done up to now. We have collected the data. We started with some new monitoring. Actually, not really. We ideally started with new monitoring. We'll do it. And then we did the modeling, and we still have to work on future scenarios, because that's something that we will be working with you about. And it has been a combination of engagement with all the stakeholders, or at least all the stakeholders, at least part of the stakeholders. We didn't engage with everybody yet. And really the technical work. So that's kind of the foundation of the GSP. And it has really been this year of work. But now we need to get all the information that we develop and start using them to answer some of the questions that the GSA needs to answer, and start providing the measure that we need to provide for DWR. So we are going now into this idea of developing this sustainable management criteria. And you probably hear the word many times. I have the impression that it's still kind of so abstract, and it's not really clear what these criteria look like. We will have to define minimum thresholds. We will have to define triggers and objectives, measurable objectives. And I will use an example later to explain to you how we can get there. And the hope is that starting in March, we will start really looking into, the plan is to address one of these criterion at each meeting and really go through it and see if we can reach agreements. And once we get into that, probably we'll do it a little bit shifted, so we will have the TAC weigh in first and bring in the suggestion to the board. Because just because with the TAC we really have way more time to discuss details that you can kind of avoid. And then based on the sustainable management criteria, we can then start thinking about, okay, if we want to get there in 20 years from now, which type of projects can we do? What's reasonable? We can use the model to help us at least designing some of these projects, or we can really just decide, okay, let's give it a try. Let's find another grant and, I don't know, build recharge ponds or whatever. I'm just guessing. So today we really kind of focus on, okay, what are these criteria and how do we define them? And then we had some fun today. Our colleague at UC Davis, Thomas Arthur, developed this analogy between the sustainable groundwater and your body. So at some point, everybody needs regular health checks. So if everything is fine, you know, you don't have, it's just regular. You don't have anything to do in terms of fixing it. So your groundwater system is fine. There is nothing really going wrong. And we can think about this as a thermometer. But then at some point, you can start having a temperature, and then eventually you go to the doctor. And you have to think about how you want to treat your body in order to go back to your healthy conditions, right? And this can be something very simple. And this is what we can think about in terms of sustainable groundwater as a reversible undesirable impact. It's something that maybe happened 1 year. I don't know. Let's imagine that there is a very, very, very dry year, and that year things go a little bad, but then starts raining in October, which is not normal, and then things go back. So you just fix it. But it's important to just decide, okay, that, to decide about triggers that can tell you, oh, my temperature is going high, I need to do something, or my levels in the groundwater are going too low, I may have to do something. When things get really worse, you have to think about starting deciding on some threshold temperature, because below that threshold you don't want to go, because you know that if you go below that threshold, if your temperature goes too high for many days, you really don't want that. So you may have to take you may have to end up into, Thomas was really kind of serious on this, emergency mode, emergency room. And in terms of the groundwater system would be, you have undesirable results that are really difficult to reverse. So like your conditions are just going worse and worse and worse, and you cannot really do things in a better way. Until when you really get to the point, your groundwater is not usable anymore. And that's where you don't want to get, because those are results that are difficult to really reverse. I think if you want to think about something which is really not reversible, if you think about subsidence in the lower part of Central Valley, I mean, those feet and feet and feet of subsidence right now are not really reversible. So it happened, and now obviously you need to work with those. But in a sense, in our specific case, it's more like, let's set triggers that tell us when we have to do something. And this is exactly what these measurable objective and minimum thresholds are. So the measurable objective is good condition of your system, and what you would like to have as a really good condition of your system. And minimum threshold is the value under which you don't want to go. And that's something like a barrier that you don't want to pass, because you know that if you go below that, it might be not reversible. At the same time, I want to point out that you may end up going under your threshold, maybe for a year or two. because of some natural condition, something that happens. The importance is that it's able to get back, and that you are doing management.
When you finish that.
Okay, that you can have management action that help you just solve that. You may go down below the threshold for just a very small value, so it's still okay, and then you get up. Yep.
On the topic of minimum threshold, slide 26, when that comes up, speaks to the issue, cannot be much lower than prior to January 1 of 2015. So if you can link that into these remarks as we get towards slide
Yeah.
26, that would be helpful.
Yeah. So the idea. So this is another graphical way to represent what we have. So we have these measurable objectives that are pretty much where ideally we would like to be, and like the good condition of the system. So we will have to present to you all the data that we are collecting about each of the 6 undesirable results. And the way we like to say that is basically to look at this as thermometer, and we need to create a thermometer that works for each of the 6 undesirable results. Obviously, we will not be talking about seawater intrusion. Fine. We can have 5 instead of 6, because we cannot say that you have seawater intrusion. But our goal will be to work with the TAC, and then the TAC probably making recommendation and come to the board to decide, okay, what's the number that we want to have for measurable objective and minimum threshold? So where would we ideally be, and what's the really worst case scenario we don't want to go below? And this is really, it's gonna be different for each of the criteria. And that's the reason why we decided from March on to organize the meetings more on, each meeting will have as a topic one of these criteria. And we will go through those to try to understand and decide and kind of vet on which are these objective and threshold. They are numbers. So we will have to come up with something. That's how it will work.
Laura, before you dive into this one particular criteria, you gave us 6 criteria there.
Mm-hmm.
We have a big basin with lots of different places in it.
Mm-hmm.
There's conceivably hundreds, if not thousands, of places we could be sampling. And then you mentioned there's a time aspect of this. Do we sample every week, every day, every month, every year? And you gave us some thoughts about, well, let me just go to the bottom line here. We could be taking millions of different data points over the course of a decade. Mm-hmm. So how do we narrow that down to where is it important to measure, and how frequently is it important to measure to get to the core of this?
Yeah.
You gave us a couple hints. You said, well, first of all, we can ignore seawater intrusion. That's great. Do we have to be doing this daily? Can we drop it down to a couple times a year and be practical?
Yeah.
Can we find a few indicator locations and say that's going to help us understand the basin as a whole?
Yeah.
We hope you have lots of tricks like that.
Together with the definition of objective, threshold, and in general just all the criteria, we will be defining a monitoring network. The monitoring network will be related to each of the criteria. So we will decide, and hopefully what we hope is that it will be possible to use our models, our tools, to decide, okay, these are the key locations where we would like to keep monitoring for the next 20 years. And again, remember that if we see that things need to be changed a little bit, you will be able to do it after 5 years. But the monitoring network, I think, is the next key piece that comes together with this criteria. So I totally agree with you. You don't want to monitor, also because you first have to find people available to share millions of data. And we know that that's tricky. But you don't want to monitor where it's not useful. So we will be working together on bringing to you what's already there now, So you will see the data as they are right now. Let's take, for example, water quality. We are right now thinking of starting as a first criterion with water quality because it's pretty easy as an exercise to understand how this process works. You can see, Zach, that surface water depletion, defining the criteria for that will be way more complicated. So we will bring to you all the data that are there right now, and then we will discuss together. If in areas where really you don't see any trend, you may just decide, okay, it's enough that we monitor twice per year or once per year in this specific location. In area where something is going wrong for some reason, you may want to say, okay, let's maybe for some times monitor a little more often or monitoring more location to really try to understand what's happening. So the monitoring network is exactly what goes together with this exercise. So this exercise will define sustainable criteria. So we will have, ideally, we will have a number for measurable objective and a number for the minimum threshold. We will have an idea of our ideal GSP monitoring network. And then if there is a problem, we will also come up with possible actions, things that we can do that we believe should help for that specific problem. And ideally, I hope we will be able to answer to a lot of this question with our tools when everybody feels comfortable about what we put together. And hopefully it looks like it's going in the right direction beside a few adjustments here and there. It will require also, we have to be honest, we can monitor where we have wells, where we will be able to drill more wells, but it's not that we can drill everywhere. There is no money, no time for doing that, so we will have to be honest and just think about where is feasible to monitor. If we really have some heartbreak in terms of areas that are behaving completely different than others, I didn't bring this up because I think this is something we may still want to avoid if possible, but we can bring up the idea of having different management areas. So different areas of the basin can have different criteria. But I tell you, it's extra work for the GSA because you will have to be defining completely like two GSPs in a sense, 2 or 3 or 4, whatever. Not completely, but part of. So it has to be really justified if you want to go into defining different areas that will go with different criteria.
Thank you.
Does it work? Okay. So if we go back to this one just give you a graphical representation and just a sketch. So our 4 terms are sustainability goal, the undesirable results that are the 6 undesirable results that I presented to you early, and then minimum threshold and measurable objective. So the minimum threshold we already said is what the lowest value you don't want to cross, the lowest line you don't want to cross, because after that it's gonna be not reversible. And
Could
then
you explain not reversible?
not reversible is
it
like
based upon the geology that's here, or your impression of the geology that's here, what define irreversible?
So I can give you some kind of exaggerated example. Let's imagine that now you know that, for example, the river and the aquifer, they are connected, disconnected, connected, disconnected. Things are very, very variable throughout the season, throughout the year, because you have more flow in the winter, you have less in the summer, so the connection come and goes. But let's imagine that at some point the groundwater system starts being fully disconnected from the river, and instead of going up and down, start just going down. So because something happens in terms of use.
So what you're saying is from the river to the basin, but not from the basin to the river?
Yeah, so there will be only river contributing to the aquifer, and the aquifer never contributing anymore to the river because it's just going down. And why this happened might be
There's
different.
already an example of that.
Yeah, it's only an example. I'm just saying it's
I
an
mean,
exaggeration.
saying here in this valley.
Yeah, it's an exaggerated
to you.
example. I doubt it can really happen unless it stops raining completely. Let's imagine. Or your other big unknown is what happens with the reservoir. So the releases are changing, so
Right.
things may change, and we don't know what's gonna happen, right? So I just gave you an exaggerated example, but that's something that, you know, after many years of just decline, might be very complicated to bring it back. That's the unreversible. And the other example that I gave you is like the land subsidence in the southern part of Central Valley that happened for so many years that now a lot of this subsidence is not reversible. So it just happened.
But for this place,
For this place,
that seems unlikely.
no, that doesn't happen. No. So for this place, what I can see is really whatever climate condition or reservoir management or whatever that can really affect. We know that the biggest problem for you is surface water, groundwater. That is really affecting the interaction between surface water and groundwater in a way that groundwater is never connected anymore to the river.
Never's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Back to slide 26.
Not quite to
Is this one?
No,
It's-
forward.
It's, cannot be
Oh,
much
no,
lower
I didn't get
than-
there yet.
Huh? Okay,
I didn't get there yet.
It's forward.
I'm coming.
going backwards, okay.
Okay, it's here.
That's the one, thank you.
So the story, so the idea is that, you know, Sigma was passed in January 2015. So it's kind of, January 2015 is like of the baseline.
Why?
That's what has been decided.
By who?
That's in the
By the legislation,
in the
sorry,
legislation.
by the
in the law.
legislation.
So is that to say that if this basin has not been utilized, that we've had such an abundance of water that we have not really reached down into the basin to draw water, by legislation we're prevented from doing that in future years?
It's not a done, okay, maybe I can explain a little better. So the legislation, Sigma passed in January 2015, which, let's put it this way, for most of the basin, that time was the worst ever. Let's say the lowest possible condition. And so basically, I think it has been done in a way so you really don't want, you want to be realistic, and you cannot recreate condition from 60 years ago. So setting that as a baseline, it's kind of making life easier in a sense, because that's really the worst case scenario where it can happen again. There can be again a drought like 13 and 14, but maybe with some management you can address it in a way that is better than what happened in 2015. So you don't want to go lower than that value, which was because it was the lowest possible. Let's use groundwater elevation as an example. It was the lowest possible groundwater elevation pretty much throughout the entire state in the past whatever years.
This sounds a terrible lot like one size fits all. So if we have different geology,
You can change, yeah,
so do we have the ability to preserve the option of having that line be lower if we can demonstrate over time that the geology here, our relative elevation in relation to sea level, et cetera, makes it so this could be drawn down substantially more than the very low drawdown that we've historically done?
Justify they can.
go ahead.
Sorry, I think if you justify it in your plan that 2015 is not what defines your sustainability of the basin,
That's my point.
you can go lower. I think there's a
That's
basin
my
that you inspected that did went.
So but the thing is that you can go lower than that, so you can make the criteria even stricter than what it is. You cannot loosen it up.
Right.
So
The point is, for me, in looking through the slides prior to the meeting, it occurred to me that if we were working towards studying it and fully understanding it, with the mind, being mindful of preserving the resource for the long term, this seemed like an arbitrary limit that got in the way of benefiting from the study of it and finding out what we actually have. So I think it's important that we not be constrained by something that is great for somewhere else, but isn't really true here.
Yeah. And that's exactly the idea of this local control and having the GSA taking some action and taking responsibility for whatever is decided. So the idea was to set a baseline. Really, things cannot go worse than that condition. And it was important to decide on a certain base level at the state for the state. But if there is a way to demonstrate, no, we really. Honestly, up in Siskiyou County, for example, they said that's really not the baseline they want to use, because for the upper part there, January 2016 was way worse, and they don't want to get as bad as January 2016, because January 2016 they had a lot of wells drinking wells that went dry, and they want to prevent that. Right?
Understood, but we didn't have that issue here.
Exactly, no, but you will have to look at your data, and like in that case, they kind of wanted to say, we don't want wells that go dry, so we make it different. We will have to go through our data and discuss with you, and just decide what you think fits the basin.
All right, yes. So I'm saying to the other members of this body, I think it's important that we not be constrained any more than absolutely required to deal with the water levels at this date, because it's not representative of where we are. So we should strive to have our limits based upon the resource that's here, not what was set in motion for somewhere else.
I think it comes to the idea of undesirable results. Part of this is the undesirable result. The condition in January 1st, 2015, we were not in an undesirable result. There was lots of slack in our system.
Right.
So, we would define what would be an undesirable result. That would be where we would be looking at a minimum threshold.
I agree. That's something we want to establish, not something we want to have established for us based upon somewhere else.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I put it there because really that is what it's in the legislation. They had to start somewhere, but really, there is room for rediscussing based on what you think should be.
Preserve whatever options we can for ourselves in those definitions. Thank you.
Welcome. And just to finish it up, basically, these two lines kind of represent what we will be working on, really presenting to you the data for the past 30 years for all the undesirable results, and we will go through each of them and decide how make a decision in a way that really makes sense for the basin, with the idea of preserving as much as possible what is there. And we will have, so we have a measurable objective and a minimum threshold, and this kind of blue bar will be our operational range. So things will we can, there is climate variability, there are different type of variabilities, whatever can happen. So it's not that you have to stay at your measurable objective fixed over year and year and year, but things can go up and down, and as long as you move within a range, which is what is acceptable for the basin, and it's within these two numbers that we will be defining. What we think, so we will be starting next time as a first criterion with water quality. So we will start at the TAC level, and then we'll bring recommendation to the board. But I pointed out here, we really believe, and we will leave this one as the last one, most of our discussion will be around how to define objectives for surface water depletion, because it's the key controversial point in the valley, and probably it is the reason why you guys are doing this GSP. And I just pointed there, if somebody wants to read more, there is a lot of material out there. If somebody wants to, it's all available online, So you can just Google it and find it. And I think, and this is some more material that I wanted to point out. Even so, the previous one was about groundwater quality. This one is about surface water groundwater interaction. If somebody wants to move ahead of the curve and start learning about what we can do, that's just we just mainly wanted to provide everybody. And if you write us, we can send you all the PDF for everything. If somebody wants to start reading, we can give you more informations. And I think I'm closing with this one. So if somebody has more questions, suggestions, or waiting to get to the numbers before starting the real discussion.
I think it'll be helpful, just discussing one item at each meeting, like you were saying, going forward, rather than covering so much stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was really meant to be mostly just an introduction, so on theory, in a sense. I think once we get at each meeting, we will start looking at one specific item. It will be way more contained.
So, we had some remarks made by Director Robinson, Vice Chair Crane. Do you want to turn any of these into action or just move forward?
Well, if I would move that we direct staff to see that the language that comes forward preserves our option regarding the establishment of something other than the date cited here, the date in the legislation, based upon what's real coming out of the study. In other words, preserve the ability to find another lower limit.
Is that gonna, I wonder if is the state gonna accept that?
I don't know.
Is that gonna be a problem if we try and change that, something like that?
Yeah.
And maybe it's some stealth language that speaks to how to study it, but whatever can reasonably be done to preserve the greater community's access
The most options.
to that level.
We can certainly take that as direction to staff and work with our DWR liaison and try to get some more clarity on how, what flexibility we have with the measurable objectives section and that January 1, 2015
We're sitting
date.
at roughly 600 foot above sea level. So as you say, a saltwater intrusion's not an issue. We're a graben with a lip to the south of us that holds water, so it's not seemingly going to drain out. So everything that's in that bowl should be a lot more accessible than, and it's very different than what I perceive the balance of the course to be to Jenner in terms of the geology, the ability, sea level relationship, the landform, et cetera. It's just different here than virtually all of the other areas that you're studying, I believe.
We will. And I really think that once we start coming with, not just with this abstract presentation, but the actual data from your basin, it would be much easier to have a really useful discussion and really see, okay, do we like this number? Do they make sense? Or maybe that day will make sense for most of the sustainable criteria. Maybe not. So, but
If
I
we don't think about it, realizing that we are potentially different than the others.
No, I get.
We may wind up doing what everybody else does and then preclude the use of that water in the future.
No, and you know what we are doing right now, it's really not at all related to that date, which is in the legislation. We are just working on your 30 years period. So what we will bring to you is 30 years, and we will work together on what we think makes sense.
So, I have to say your motion died, for lack of a second, but this is a notation we need to make, and
Hopefully that's reflected in the minutes.
did you get it? Comment by Vice Chair Crane.
I got most of the comments, but not the complete motion.
Are we taking this as a formal motion, or is this just direction of staff?
Well,
At this point, it's direction. So,
you want to just leave it there? Leave it at direction?
okay. Direct,
Motion died.
okay. Thank you, Director Brown. You're kind of hidden over there. Just throw something at me. Okay.
You want to borrow this?
Did I understand correctly, we'll get copies of some of those graphs you put up on the screen after the meeting?
Yes.
Super.
Ms. Duquette said they'll post it
Okay.
on the page, on the website
We can send
of these documents. Oh, you want to send them to, or just a link?
We'll post it on the website, and if you'd like us to send you it directly, we can.
I'll just grab the posting in a week, no problem.
All righty.
That concludes our presentation today. We will be back here in March, second Tuesday in March. That's it's second Thursday. This is not the Board of Supervisors. Sorry.
That's okay. All right. So, director's reports. We're all ready for 2020, and as everybody's saying, hopefully it's great vision for the entire year. Okay, we're adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Chair.